So in talking about the prime cause of being, the shape of nature gets imposed by the constraints that it can't help but generate in its becoming. To use the Aristotelian model,
if we start with the idea of pure unformed potential fluctuations without directions, an infinity of dimensions without cohesion,
then what kind of dimensionality could begin to cohere out of that fundamental vagueness?
well, symmetry seems to tell us that there is only one dimensionality that is the possible outcome of any such striving to become organized in some exact and balanced fashion.
Only 3D could be where actuality begins, as it is only in 3 dimensions that the number of rotational degrees of freedom match the number of translational degrees of freedom.
As a metric, only 3D has the property that then produces physics
As we know it,
dimensionality with the basic Newtonian principles of the conservation of momentum.
as both translations and rotations, and so the holism of the Galilean group of symmetries. Also, only 3D has a doubling halving story built into it in the fashion which gives gravity and force their inverse square law, and so sets up a metric that can expand geometrically while also diluting at the same rate.
You can have a metric driven by the explosion of its hot content, but that explosion then lasts forever as the hot content is getting cooled by that expansion.
And so the whole thing takes until the end of time to cool to zero and come to a complete stop.
So you have a story where there is symmetry, and it's breaking that starts right from some ultimate state of vague potential.
A symmetry where everything was possible as nothing had yet started to happen in any cohesive sense. An infinity of dimensions that was both an everythingness yet also less than nothing. Then all this potential could be poured into the generation of something. It could become broken by the fact that 3D was a stabilizing solution, a Platonic form.
If any kind of physical geometry was going to exist,
It had to be this one. Of course, you then have to explain the other aspects of the Big Bang, like how this 3D receptacle started plank small and so plank hot because of quantum mechanics and its gauge symmetries.
and how it was also the start of time in any proper sense, as the speed of light
Got added to give the metric its 4D relativistic symmetry, its Poincare group of symmetries.
It all gets quickly complex in topological fashion,
But this picture says we have a metaphysics
where anything was possible, and yet that everythingness was immediately being
constrained by mathematical principles. To become actualized, it had to strike on a structure that made the most geometric sense. It had to be a hot 4D space-time spec that would instantly begin to expand and cool.
a spec whose dimensionality was defined in unit 1 terms by its 3 critical constants of
C, G, and H.
That is, the strength of gravity to define the flatness of its translations, the quanta of action to define its fundamental unit of particle spin or intrinsic rotation, and the speed of light as the unifying rate at which the relativistic metric and its quantum contents could thermally decohere and start becoming a realm of material particles.
The gauge constraints could kick in and start to fashion raw fluctuations into the vectors and spinors that are the zoo of standard model matter, the shapes of the excitations we know. As the electrons, protons, neutrons, and photons of a world organized under the ultimate gauge simplicity of you. Electromagnetism and the messy hierarchy of mass terms added to particle fields by the heat-based mechanism. The further symmetry breaking that turned on gravity by breaking 4D space-time into an effectively 3D story of an inertial rest frame of co-moving matter particles.
So in a nutshell, the universe exists in a complex fashion by striving to become as simple and balanced as possible in symmetry terms.
It only arrives in its current state, having eliminated infinite possibility and boiled itself down to what remained as the simplest possible state, with its now locked-in remaining order.
It eventually arrived at its destination. A dust of gravitating and electrically neutral atoms in a void of uniformly scattered 2.7 degree K photons. And even that stage will pass with the ultimate concrete simplicity of a heat death. Just a last baseline sizzle of absolute zero photons radiated by the cosmic event horizon, the co-moving space-time metric, finally reaching its doubling halving.